Mel and Sheridan. Mel, you've been out of the country a long time now, and Sheridan for you 6 years. As you come back, Mel, you would come back often. What's your reflection on Australian culture from a distance? You know, it's that old proverb. You know, if you want to know about water, don't ask a fish. Yeah, we sort of sit in our culture all the time. As you come back, what do you think about Australian culture? That's a huge question, but a couple of thoughts.
Yeah, it is a huge question. As I said before, I've lived outside for 23 years now, first in Copenhagen for 10 and then in the UK. I think for me, one of the striking things sometimes about, and I love Australia, it's still in my heart, my homeland. I was sent to Europe. But I think one of the things that we face here that is a challenge is that we are so far away. It's an advantage and a disadvantage. It's an advantage in that we are a pioneer culture because we've had to invent everything from 2 pieces of 4x2 and some barbed wire. You know, we've had to make, we can't learn from anybody on our immediate borders as we do in Europe or Latin America. That's a disadvantage too, because we're so far away, we tend to get, I mean, when I watch the news here, world news here is laughable. And I think Christians can change that. The SBS used to be the only station when I'd come back that I could watch and feel halfway informed, but that now has such an agenda that I'm not sure I'm getting balanced news there. So I find that a challenge that we need to somehow correct. This country is a lot smarter, I believe, than when I was growing up. It's a lot more educated than when I was growing up. The church culture is a lot more accepting of education and thought than it was when I was growing up. But I still think as a culture we can help move that story forward, inform it more about what's happening in the world. You mentioned the refugee crises. Someone talked about Uganda before. These are so far away from us here in Australia, and we just need... I find it a bit, not disturbing, I find it a bit unsettling. The television news here, the commercial television news, is about fairly vacuous things and presented in a fairly vacuous fashion. That's just my impression.
Coming back to Sheridan, Tanya, you're nodding profusely, which is very encouraging. Let me ask you a question that's nothing to do with that. What is it like being a 16-year-old penning a song which gets such a huge use? I mean, it wasn't kind of used in the introduction, but Tanya actually wrote at 16, Jesus, what a beautiful name. That's a little kind of odd, fabulous, confronting for you. What was that like?
For me, it's interesting because now I lecture at Hillsong College, and you know, people introduce me, the girl that wrote this song, and none of my students can remember the song, which is no, that's not true. A few, but I
both of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess in many ways, I guess as a 16-year-old, I found this community that was amazing. The church is a hidden wonder of the world. It's this amazing place where you gather young and old, people of all different backgrounds, and they all share in this love of God. So for me personally, it felt like a blessing to be able to give and to be able to hear the stories that have come back over the years. I've sung that song in so many places, in refugee camps, in, you know, the strangest churches, you know, in like the littlest nooks and crannies of Italy and various places. And I always just think it's a blessing. It's just amazing that we all share this ability to worship God.
I'd love to. There's so much I'd like to follow up on that. Larissa, we're coming back to you, Sheridan. Don't feel bad.
No,
Larissa,
it's fine, mate.
Yeah.
Go right on ahead.
Larissa, how do you, given the story that you told and the situation that you're in, and a lot of the commentary that we hear in Australia about people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, how do you kind of hold bitterness at bay?
I guess one of the things is thank God that I follow him. Yeah, it really is. It's because of my faith that I'm able to see what God sees, and it's very much, you know, I'm not new to the game. I'm actually the 4th generation, of pastor. So, you know, our family has a very entrenched Christian faith, And so, I guess it was never bitterness, but it's just sadness that we see people suffering, and it's actually my people.
But you would also see this sense of a rolling tide of your people kind of toward a place of beyond sadness into bitterness. Is it hard to hold against that tide?
Yes and no. Because sometimes that tides against myself personally, myself and my family. I mean, some of the most racist acts that's ever happened in our family was from the church. And, and so it's hard. It's easier for us to not engage with white churches than to engage with them, because they use dominant Christian culture against us, because we're seen as the evil natives. And so so it's to take that humanness away from us, and then deem us as we have to make you white. Yeah.
You strike me as someone who has not allowed the tide to overcome you. So that's fabulous in your character and in your person, which endears you greatly.
But it's
to us.
also part of our culture. It's very much part of our kinship culture, where Tanya is now not just Tanya, she's actually my sister. And she actually calls, my dad uncle and auntie, which is real,
Yeah.
So we're never alone. There's no loneliness or in our language.
Yeah.
Loneliness doesn't exist, because our responsibility to family is quite big.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's something you can learn.
Thank you. Sheridan, 6 years away.
Yes.
You come back. What's it like?
Whole bunch of things that come to mind straight away. The UK, you probably got the picture this morning. I really do love it. It's an amazing place. It's a very politically correct place, a very political place. Everything seems to be really tinged with the political. And I think maybe, this is just a theory of mine, but I think maybe we saw the surprising result of Brexit as a result of the fact that there'd been a political correctness that had come into the conversation about, in this case, immigration. And then the kind of conversation went underground, and then when people had a vote on it, suddenly they voted what they had wanted to always talk about. Nobody had allowed them to. So there is a political correctness that I find disturbing in the UK, which then I come here, and of course we've got political correctness here too, but I don't feel it to the same degree. The other thing would be, Kate Fox is a sociologist in Oxford, and she's written a book called Watching the English. And one of the things that she brings down as one of the core values of the English is empiricism. We won't believe it until we've had it really proven by science or something like that. When I come to back home, within a day or two, I'm sitting down with somebody who's just read a Deepak Chopra book, or just last week I was in Melbourne sitting down at breakfast in the hotel, and a lady said she was in the hotel because she'd come to a manifestation seminar. And so you could come and you could visualize, these people would teach you how to visualize your ultimate future and then teach you how to manifest that into your life. And she said she already had some houses in the Bahamas and everything like that as a result of visualizing this thing. And so I was wondering why she was coming back for a second course. And indeed, she also mentioned the fact that this was the last course that the people were going to run, because they didn't know, it wasn't really proving that successful. And I was wondering why
they couldn't visualize another
couldn't
conference.
visualize. Anyway, you don't want to be nasty, do you? But the fact is, within hours of coming back, I'm sitting down talking to people who are kind of that everyday new age level. And actually, I like those conversations. I don't have them in Oxford. I don't have those. And I like those here. We can utilize that. There's a friendliness here again. I live in a very short street. We all live in terrace homes, very, very closely packed together. We never say hello. Oh gosh, I try my hardest. I really, really do. There is an insularity there which I don't feel there is here. So there's some trouble, and I'm fully with Mal when it comes to media over here. But there are some good things that I love coming back to when we return on these shores.
Tanya, going back to the Brexit comment, when we're trying to understand culture, and I think what Sharon just said, I think is a big issue about understanding culture, because a lot of our mainstream media culture is actually dominated, I think, both here in this country and in the UK and other places, by what's now tagged as the elites. So How do you kind of navigate your way through what you see in mainstream culture? Is there a way that you approach that, which is a hint that you're all going to get asked this question? What do you now? It's just hints. There's no kind of here's the way to do it. But what are some of the ways that you deal with that?
Yeah, well, I think it's a really interesting question actually, because being in the university space and also in the church space, there are various perceived levels of power. And I think social media has given people the opportunity to voice an opinion without having to necessarily go through 17 years of higher education. That everybody's opinion is valid. And there's some great, I'm a Pentecostal. I'm all about everybody having a say in the, God being able to show us a voice, a path through the diversity and the voices, but in the chaos maybe. But I think, that power and the different power centers is a struggle that has always been there. And when you start to get into the university sector, you realize, the elites is not really a group that hug in the corner and, all see eye to eye on everything. There is no elites. There is a lot of people who are have very influential voices, who are trying to get their voices heard, that are using all kinds of media to do that. Some successfully, some not successfully, and it's really about power, I think. And I think where we put ourselves in that story is how we tell the story. So I move between both spheres, the popular and the academic. I never want to see the world in those binaries, because I do think there are lots of people who are between them, and who there are some good ideas and there are some really good leaders, and maybe if they came together, we could forge a way through, rather than characterizing the other and fighting against a perceived group of people.
Mel, for you?
Can you repeat?
Yeah, Tanya did a great job on clearly a question that the men don't understand.
What are you talking about?
Here's this
That's
whole...
another thing coming back to Australia. I get no respect. There's just no respect.
A prophet in his hometown.
I'll speak slowly for the foreigners. No, what I was trying to say, when Sheridan, this is a reflection of my ability, not yours, when Sheridan was talking about Brexit and the idea that there was this kind of PC of the UK, but interestingly, that was repeated in America across Trump, where you've got a whole bunch of people who are saying this is what's going to happen, and almost what they're saying is this is the culture, this is the narrative of the culture, here's where we'll go, and then everybody votes differently, which means that somehow they've missed the culture. So what I'm trying to say is, how do you navigate your way through there? In Australia, you will have heard the term the pub test, which is the idea about what does a Joe Average think? So how do you get to that space in your thinking?
It's a very good question. The Brexit was something that I was asked a lot about on the BBC and radio and television. So that's a long conversation, that one. It's not as easy to decipher as some people will make out. I think, though, what happens with the elites, first of all, as people in this room will understand, but a lot of church leaders don't, is that the media isn't a single culture. It's streams within streams, it's cultures within cultures. Some of them are very different to each other. Even with a £6 billion organisation per annum like the BBC, there are many streams. The dominant culture, though, is set largely by those at the top, as is always the case. Leaders are cultural architects. And in many ways, what we have lacked in the Christian scene is people who can influence that level of decision making. It's all right to have a journalist in a church, but if you've got the top producer of a station or the managing director, then you've got a shot at some influence. I think where the elites, quote unquote, have missed things like Trump, like Brexit, is that they drink their own bathwater, essentially. They surround themselves with people who agree with them. They like to they like to interview people who will come out with answers that are fairly predictable. They also, and people, to be fair to them, people will often be interviewed purely on the basis that I can use this as an opportunity to get my foot in the door. I will never accept an invitation. I get asked a lot and say no, because I won't accept an invitation if I don't feel I can add value to that story. If I can't add unique value, and secondly, make the producer who invited me, who is usually on a 6-month work contract, a young person on a 6-month contract, I want to make them look extremely good in the eye of their employer. And so I think the elites just get cut off, whether it's in academia or in media, it's the same thing. And the only way to change that is for us to continue to access people outside the media bubble. So Sheridan's not in that bubble, I'm not in that bubble, Tenny's not in that bubble, Narissa's not in that bubble. We can speak into that as independent voices and help break that down, but it's going to take a while. It's become very institutionalised.
Yeah. So Larissa, have you got any thoughts about how you understand the culture outside of what you hear in the media or what is pushed to you by major media organisations? Are there ways that you kind of see your way into the Australian culture or mindset?
Yeah, it's called Netflix. No.
Hang on. I just got to write that down.
Well, one, we're very much not represented on Australian media at all, apart from SBS. But if we do see ourselves on the main media, it's because of tourism. So we're more of a commodity than we are a part of this Australian nation. It's, I guess, talking from the federal court hat, it's very interesting because the Chief Justice came and did a speech, and one of the things that he said is that law is power. And so I took that and I said, wow, you know, that if the words on a paper can, as in the Constitution, can have such a powerful effect on our society, why am I not in there? And that's the story. So I won't invest my time in watching main media when there's no representation of me.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sheridan, any thoughts?
It's just so fascinating, and then for you to be somehow represented in that area so that we can hear your voice, so that we can shape it, so we can get it balanced out again. The BBC have actually tried to do that in the last decade in the UK scene by kind of establishing themselves from a London-centric studio complex to then actually having other bases around the country to try and get a variety of different voices and viewpoints there. And so we can take a note from that as we go and we seek out the other viewpoints. I mean, the UK, the most amazing thing about the UK is just the number of different accents that you have in one country. You go north and you've got 3 different accents there. You go south, you've got 3 different accents there. You go to London and you've got different accents. Yeah? Huh? Huh? Yeah. And so, you've got a variety, even within one little tiny country, 66 million people crammed into this tiny little thing the size of Tasmania or something. It's incredible, density. And I do some stuff with the BBC as well. They've got a little, so this is the interesting thing, they've still got a God spot on BBC Radio 2. Largest radio network in Europe, 16 million listeners weekly. And they've still got a couple of little God spots on there. Now, these days, they're multi-faith. But I get to go in there as a Christian and actually get to have the joy of waking up at 3:30 in the morning, getting in the car by 4, being in London by 5:15, being on air at 5:45 for 2 minutes, and then saying goodbye to Vanessa and her producer, walking down those stairs, swiping myself out and getting back to Oxford in time to make Marion breakfast at 7:30. But during that time, I get to speak to 2.5 million people as a committed Christian, speaking into the secular context. Now, I don't know that there's a week that I don't walk through those doors and suddenly feel the pressure to secularize. Now, the producers are very good. They have said to me in the past, their language, be religious. Don't want you to walk down. Be religious, but don't preach at me. And so I have to own everything, have to write everything in a way that is owning it and saying this is my experience, etc. But even still, walking through those doors. And so I think part of it is that we go out of our way to try and seek out those other voices, to pass the microphone so we can have those. And then also we can be in that space. We can be in that space to write the imbalance of voices.
And you don't have to be in, I agree with what you said, Sheridan, and Thought for the Day is a great success. But we also need to remember, and Sheridan agrees with this because we had long discussions about it, I don't go into the BBC as a Christian anything. Right. I've been asked on air by the BBC arts editor, who's a very qualified man, you're a Christian, aren't you? And then, do you believe Christians are persecuted in this country? To which the answer was no, for several reasons. But the important thing is he didn't Google me. He's too busy to find out who I am. But something in what I said, I'm not there as a Christian. I'm there as a social commentator and sometimes a social futurist. And I think we need to see a generation of young people who, the BBC recently got rid of its Department of Religion. Given that Lord Reith started it with Philippians 4 in mind, whatever is good, whatever is noble, think on these things. There is no longer any Department of Religion and Ethics within the BBC as of a few months ago. I'm not actually that perturbed about that, because I want to see religious people, Christian people, in all the other 59 departments of the BBC. And I think that's what we've got to detoxify the religious brand by saying, we can talk about worldview, that's what we want. We can talk about ethics. Let's talk about that. That's where your conversation is. Joel Edwards, a good friend of ours, who was the head of Evangelical Alliance in Britain for many years, says this: Christians are often like people who turn up at a discussion on nuclear physics and ask the question, do you like bananas? We're not in the conversation with curiosity about what's being discussed. So when I go in the media, it's a lot of work to do that. They ring you up, within an hour you've got to be on a comment on some issue. You may not be au fait with everything, but I think it's worth it. And I'm trying to get younger people now to do exactly that, to engage. And if they don't invite you on Thought for the Day, it's great if they do. But if they don't, there's still other places.
Tanya, what's the moments of hope within our community that you see? In our culture, what are the moments, the shafts of light of hope?
There's so many. I think, I was watching Micah dance today, and I was thinking, the younger generation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders give me an amazing hope, because there is reconciliation happening in that generation. And to me, that's a huge hope. I think when I look at the church, I see it's beautiful. I preach in all kinds of churches, Anglican, Baptist, Pentecostal, and every time I'm struck by how amazing it is, and that God is building his church in Australia. And even though potentially, there are stories about, decline, sometimes I think actually God's refining. There's something very beautiful about what we do have. And I think it is important to tell those stories of hope. Yeah.
For you, Larissa, the moments of hope that you see?
I think a lot of it is reclaiming a lot of what was told to us. So being authentically Indigenous, being authentic Christian, experiencing a journey of pretty much decolonising myself and trying to accept that I am Aboriginal and that I am Torres Strait Islander. Because when I went to school, it wasn't something you say, and I was just the black girl, But it's funny because then I'm actually connecting to a lot of other cultures, the multicultural of Australia, who identify with my story more so. And it's so much easier to tell them that my story. And so that's the hope, is that, that we just kind of keep sharing this journey together. It doesn't have to be in a building, and that's the main thing. I just feel that when God wants to work, he works wherever he wants to work. Yeah. And I'd rather be out under a tree doing church than in a building because it's so much prettier outside. But, I guess we've got to rethink the way of how we do church.
Thank you. Sheridan, you're obviously speaking into an English culture. You're trying to be religious but not preaching, and you're trying to bring hope, and you're looking for the cracks into the community. What are the cracks that you kind of trying to insert hope into?
Into the UK. It's funny because I think it still is easier here, I really do. Although things are changing in the UK. There is a spiritual openness, and there's been a lot of fruitfulness actually recently. And there's been some surveys out showing that actually the mainstream Brit actually doesn't think as negatively about Christians as we are told. So that actually they see Christians as caring and loving kind of people. And you think, wow, well that's the opposite of what we keep on getting through a whole bunch of the whether it be the TV series like Rev or whatever, we see a different picture. So that's really, really good. I'm going to be doing a seminar on this afternoon called
Okay.
Listening to the Soul of Your Community, where we're going to be looking at how to kind of pick up on the longings that are kind of evidenced through books and films and conversations.
So
that
here's
are
an
happening.
opportunity for you to all learn about how to market yourself in a community. When you get asked a question, you pitch your seminar, which is not bad because there's a great big red sign up here that says time's up. And Sheridan, Mal, Tanya and Larissa have shared with us. I want you to thank these guys. Thank you.